The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. I am your host, as always, Caleb Hanks, and with me, the beautiful, the wonderful, the majestic, Austin Burgess. Austin, brother, how are you tonight?
Pretty well. How are you doing tonight, man?
Man, I'm hanging in there. I had a bit of an exhausting trip this weekend, but I'm back in action and excited as always to be here in the studio doing this thing because, let's face it, man, this is our ultimate cozy zone.
For sure. Glad you made it back in one piece.
You and me both. Yeah. Sometimes when you're traversing the majestic mountains of Western North Carolina and coming back through the gorge from Tennessee, man, that ride is not fun, especially with the highway being in the state of disarray that it's been in for the last little bit. I don't know if you've been down that way in a minute.
Yeah, I don't think I've been there post-Helene, but I've seen enough pictures to only imagine.
Oh yeah, it is. It's not a pretty sight. But once again, thank you everybody for tuning in. And sadly, I don't know if they're necessarily in the mountains, but we got the addition of a few more ghosts. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys has passed away. As of, I believe, yesterday, I think it was.
Yeah, I believe so.
And then the same day, actor Harris Yulin, who you might not know the name, but I guarantee you know the face. He was the judge in Ghostbusters 2 that's essentially, sentencing the Ghostbusters at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, the classic scene.
Oh, yeah. I loved the way that those ghosts look that come out, and are terrorizing the courtroom there. I always thought the special effects in that just looked so great. But, rest in peace to these two legends. And that being said, today's episode, well, hey, you guessed it. We're going to be in Asheville again.
We're back home.
We're back home. I'm back home, and we are back home for this episode. And yeah, I'm very excited. I like traveling, but I am always excited to be back in my own bed and the comforts of my own home.
And covering my own city.
Oh, and covering the horrifying things that happen in my own very strange city.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing, and I'll kind of touch on that later, but we've touched on Asheville kind of being a hotbed for just weird historical occurrences and just kind of strange, unexplained phenomena in general, but it just seems never ending. The more we keep digging, the more we keep finding.
It's interesting that you use that phrase, never ending. I am looking out the window right now, and there's a giant bear here. That's not what I'm talking about for my statement. And he's standing on 2 feet. Man, he's straight.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. He's Sasquatching over here. Look at his ass.
Oh, holy shit.
He's like, can I be on the podcast too, guys? Looks like he's got a bald spot. That better not be the bear from the Great Outdoors.
He has matching bald spots on your side.
Oh boy, he is coming straight for us. I am not even kidding. Let me get a video of this and I'll put it on the Patreon. There's not just ghosts in the mountains, there's bears. See you later, buddy. Get that bald spot looked at. Well, we are never at a shortage of strange occurrences here at Ghosts in the Mountains.
That was almost on cue.
Oh, 100%. So anyway, like I was saying before Bart the bald-ass bear came by, it's funny that you use the term never ending, I think is how you phrased it, because, violence and death and things like this, unfortunately, do seem to be a never-ending part of humanity. And unfortunately, in this town too, because not even 2 weeks ago, right in front of a place where I used to frequent, a little hole in the wall that people know as the Vault here in town. Love the establishment, mainly because, and I'm assuming they still have, giant 20-ounce Guinness on tap for a reasonable price there. But unfortunately, patrons of the Vault and the One Stop and some of the subsequent areas unfortunately had to witness a very, very grisly scene just a week or so ago when someone was gunned down and murdered right there in the streets. And I don't know the full details on it. I haven't really looked too much into it, but condolences to those people that had to witness that. Condolences to the person that lost their life. And it is just a tragic, tragic thing that this is still going on. It can really happen anywhere, obviously, but it is always very intense when it's close to home.
Yeah.
And the reason that we're mentioning this, other than I think it just needs to be talked about, is that it's very strange and coincidental that this occurrence would take place, because Austin and I had planned for this episode something very, very similar that took place a very long time ago that maybe you haven't heard about.
Yeah, about 120 years ago.
Yeah. And there is, I think, decent reason to believe that what we're going to be talking about today is potentially one of the reasons as to why a scattering of different hauntings takes place in this town.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there's a few different reasons that I think kind of led us to this topic. And before we start getting down the whole true crime path again and going into the world of murder, which, we don't like to do too often on this podcast, but being a paranormal podcast that specializes in ghosts, it's going to happen occasionally. But I do want to shine a little bit of positive light on our town before we start to dive into some of the more gruesome historical murders that occurred that we're going to talk about. But, for one, if you haven't read the topic of the episode, we're going to be mainly talking about Barley's Taproom in downtown Asheville and some of the subsequent hauntings that occur in the general area of that. And, for this one, Barley's is such a staple, not just to the paranormal lore of this town, but I think it's really an important staple in the overall history of Asheville.
Oh, yeah. It's what we call a legacy restaurant.
Exactly, yeah. Caleb and I have been talking a lot about these legacy restaurants in Asheville, which I basically consider places that have been around for like over 30 years, like places that are still around, that were still around when we were kids in the 90s. And, with all that kind of change and gentrification and recent natural disasters the city's been through, it really doesn't leave a long list of these legacy restaurants. And even just a couple of weeks ago, we lost another one with Laughing Seed closing down. And for those of you who don't know, Laughing Seed's this cool restaurant that served international vegetarian food. When I was a kid, my grandma lived in Kingsport, Tennessee. So when I was younger, my family would always kind of go through Asheville on the way to visit her. And with my parents being vegetarian, we'd always end up going there for dinner. And being a little picky kid at the time, I'd always order the most normal thing on the menu, a little cheese pizza. But ironically enough, later in life, kind of found my own path towards not eating meat. And Laughing Seed had really become a staple for me when I moved back to Asheville and become a favorite for Adriana and I. So it's definitely kind of sad to see it go. It's definitely been something that's been nostalgic and part of my association and time in Asheville since I was a little kid.
Wall Street in general is one of the coolest streets in the whole town because it's very small. It's kind of cobblestone.
Yeah.
I don't even know what you would even call that, but it's kind of just like an interesting textured, almost like stone road. And it's just a very unique road. There's nothing else in town that quite looks like Wall Street.
For sure. And that's something that always stuck out to me as a kid, like that whole experience parking in the Wall Street deck. And then you had that cool little climbing wall off to the side, which, again, no longer here. So,
and not to mention, you have the Flatiron Building, which has this gigantic iron out front. And my granddad actually used to work as a dental worker there. Very, very long time ago. And he met my grandmother when she was working in the clothing department of the Crest Building, right there on the other side of, unfortunately, where that murder took place not too long ago. But that's where they met back in the day.
That's a cool story. So yeah, as we're talking about these legacy restaurants in Asheville, there's really not a lot left. I think there's places like the Med and 5 Points Diner that are more kind of breakfasty spots. But outside of that, you've got like Jack of the Wood, which is the Irish pub located downstairs of the Laughing Seed building. You've got Two Pigs Barbecue out there by Asheville High and Mission. And outside of that, I think it's pretty much just Barley's, which has recently reopened their doors for the first time after Hurricane Helene. So really glad to see Barley's come back and not lose that one as well.
Yeah, all the legacy restaurants really get it. Like Jack of the Wood has Guinness on tap. Barley's has Guinness on tap. I used to always go to their upstairs part.
Yeah.
I love it up there too.
Yeah, and I will say that's the only part that's currently open right now. They're working on getting the downstairs restaurant back open as well, but new owners and staff, they're actually coming over from the salvage station, which was another really awesome music venue that got wiped out during the storm here. So really cool to see them kind of take on a new venture, and Barley's is such a staple in this town. It's cool to see it land in good hands. So seriously, go support them if you can.
Yeah. Do we have any update as to when the downstairs part is supposed to open, to your knowledge?
No, it's still kind of. I think they're doing a pretty massive renovation on that, from what I could tell. So yeah. I don't know if they're going to have a music element involved in that or not, but they're kind of modernizing some of the downstairs element. Well, I hope they still kind of keep the classic Barley's vibe for sure.
You and me both. I really hope they keep the floors in there. I really hope they keep that big wooden bar in there, because that thing.
Oh, for sure.
I think that might be the biggest bar in town, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but it's just, you can tell it's old. It's kind of almost got that like Irish pub kind of feel to it.
It does, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's if you haven't experienced Barley's, what a better time than now with them probably needing the support, and as soon as they get that restaurant going back open again, we'll have to plan a pizza party or something.
Oh, yeah.
But again, that's not the only reason we wanted to talk about Barley's today. We also wanted to pay tribute to a local legend, a man named Oscar Wong, the founder of Highland Brewing, that sadly passed away a few weeks ago. By the time this comes out, it'll probably be about a month. But this is one that, as soon as we found out, Caleb and I knew we kind of been talking about this episode, and all these synchronicities started kind of lining up. We just knew this is one that we really had to touch on with the timing of everything. But for those not familiar, Highland was the first craft brewery in Asheville since Prohibition era, and it's grown to become the largest family-owned craft brewery in the Southeast. Oscar Wong himself was born in Jamaica to Chinese parents, and then later immigrated to America in the 1960s to attend University of Notre Dame for structural and civil engineering. But while he was in school, he took an interest in home brewing as a hobby, which I think is something you kind of hear a lot about while kids are in college. Like, maybe you can't buy beer at the time, maybe it's too expensive. Just brew your own.
Sure.
So I thought that was a cool little start for him. But then Oscar went on to open a successful engineering firm that he quickly sold and retired at a young age. But after a few years of retirement, he was getting the itch for his next business venture. And that's when a local Asheville brewer reached out to him about the opportunity to start a craft brewery, which became Highland Brewing Company. Now, if you're wondering what this has to do with Barley's, we'll explain. Highland Brewing Company was actually founded in April of 1994, and they started brewing operations in the basement underneath what has become Barley's Taproom and Pizzeria today. The first brewing equipment was made from some old dairy equipment that Oscar retrofitted to kind of fit brewery needs, get that up to standards. And from what I understand, those tanks are still used at the brewery location today, but they're just storing spent grain, spent yeast, stuff like that. They're not actually used in any of the brewing process. But it's cool that he still kind of keeps that piece of history attached to the Barley's location at the new spot they've got up on the hill there.
Oh, yeah.
And Highland operated out of the basement of Barley's for 13 years before moving up to their current location in 2006. So when you look at a city that, like Asheville, that's held the title of Beer City, USA for a few years, this place was super supportive, rich brewery scene and culture with countless top-notch breweries. It really all began with the godfather of Asheville craft beer, Oscar Wong. So there's this really nice commemorative plaque for Oscar right outside Barley's. I think it'd been there for maybe a year, maybe a few months before his passing, but it's really cool that that's still there, commemorating Highland's history and their origins in the Barley's building itself. And I will say I didn't know Oscar extremely well, but we did cross paths a few times. Once when I was taking a brewing operations certification program at AB Tech, where Oscar hosted our class on a tour of the brewery and facility. And then later also met him in a sales meeting when I worked as a sales representative for Skyland Distributing, who's Highland's wholesale partner in Western North Carolina. But both times he told the same story, which I always thought was pretty funny. But to put some context to this before I go into it, at the time, the Highland logo was this burly-looking Scotsman with big bagpipes. It was kind of an iconic thing for Asheville in that era, especially, early 90s into the 2000s. And Oscar would often wear this kilt to festivals and events to kind of be on brand with the company. And I guess someone had kind of asked him why he chose to go with this Scottish type branding and imagery for the company. And his response was something along the lines of, people are going to try a lot of beers that they'll probably forget about, but one thing they'll never forget is a Chinese man wearing a kilt. And damn if he wasn't right on that. So cheers to you, Oscar.
Cheers, Oscar. That is such a cool story, man.
Yeah, for sure. I can't reiterate that enough. Like, for a town that really has thrived on its beer scene, such a big part of our tourism, like you think about people that have such an impact and influence on what the city's become today, and Oscar's got to be right at the top of that list.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, Highland brewing and Highland beer has become synonymous with Asheville in general,
Oh, for sure.
We've both been up there multiple times. They have a really awesome facility, super cool outdoors place. I've played a couple of shows there myself. I actually have gotten to play the legendary Cold Mountain release show that they would do up there a couple of times, and that is always crazy because the Cold Mountain is the fan favorite, and every year, people are just chomping at the bit to be able to get their hands on some. So
I actually keep a little bit of a Cold Mountain cellar I broke into for this specific episode. I've got a 2020 bottle of Cold Mountain pandemic year right here. So
look at you, man. That's a relic.
Yeah. Cheers to Oscar there. Had to, I don't break these out for any old occasion.
No doubt. Well, I'm glad you hung on to one because there are a couple there because, it's just fitting that we would, have a Highland beer and remember just the legacy that, he put together.
Yeah, for sure. So with that said, I think it is a nice tie-in to Barley's and kind of the history of that, which really basically coincides with the history of Highland. They opened in 1994, basically shortly after the time Highland had started brewing in the basement. You're brewing beer in the basement, you need a tap room upstairs. It all kind of makes sense. From what I could gather, the building had previously been used as an appliance store that had been in operation since the 1920s, but the original owners of Barley's kind of restored and repurposed the building for what is now the Barley's Taproom and Pizzeria. Now, the original owners, Jim and Doug, they weren't super familiar with the history of this immediate area when they purchased the building, but after they started having a few unexplained experiences, they said it became clear that something strange was lurking in the building. And after diving into some historical research, it became even more clear that this certain section of town had quite a dark past, with most significant event being what I would call the murder spree of 1906.
Yeah, the massacre perpetrated by the one, as far as we know, his name was Will Harris.
Yeah, I think he went by a few names, but from all the historical documents that I could find, I think Will Harris, whether that was his birth name or not, that's the name that stuck.
Right. At least the name that kind of went down in history.
Yeah, the name that went down in history is probably the best way to put that. And this name had already kind of built up its own rap sheet and reputation with the law before even arriving in Asheville, with charges across on the other side of North Carolina, ranging from burglary to larceny to assault. So Will Harris had a bit of a reputation attached to him already. So it kind of makes sense why he's starting to use these aliases, going by some different names, introducing himself to different people with different names. But it definitely muddies the waters down the road, as we'll find out here shortly. So now, Will Harris had been sentenced to serve on a chain gang in Charlotte, but he'd somehow managed to escape that. And then the city hired a detective, Van Griffin, whose primary focus was to track down Harris. And he did. Booked him in the county jail. But I guess security wasn't super tight back then, because Harris managed to somehow escape again. Kind of comically, only for Griffin to then catch him again. But this time he sent him to a prison in Raleigh, because tired of dealing with your shit in Charlotte, and go over to Raleigh. And while he's in Raleigh, he got assigned basically a work detail to where he was making and loading bricks on a truck. And he stuck with this for a few months, but then started devising his next great escape. And he did this by hiding out in the truck loaded with bricks. I guess they didn't thoroughly check that, but he loaded up the truck with bricks, hid himself on there underneath a pile or something, and rode his way out of the prison. And with this infamous escape, he didn't want to go back to Charlotte. He didn't want to get anywhere near Van Griffin, because this guy just had a knack for catching him. So Harris decided to make his way towards the mountains of Asheville, where an alleged potential ex-girlfriend, at least from his account, an ex-girlfriend, from her side, maybe not so much. Who knows? But he had known a woman named Molly that he'd previously met while living in Virginia. So he decided, he knew that Molly was living in Asheville. He was going to make the trek across the state and go track down what he thought was his old ex-girlfriend, Molly.
Yeah. At least in his mind, she was.
Yeah. Stories vary, but either way, Harris arrived in Asheville on November 12th, 1906, and pretty much immediately began looking for Molly. And he was, by a stroke of luck, able to find Molly's sister, Pearl, at a local cafe. But she informed Harris that Molly had moved about 20 miles away to the town of Hendersonville. Now, whether she actually moved or whether she was just freaked out and kind of taking refuge in Hendersonville after getting word that Harris had escaped prison again, that one's up for interpretation. But I think a lot of people have kind of come to believe that she'd gotten word, maybe there were wanted posters, maybe somehow she just had a feeling. I don't know. Either way, she'd booked it out of her little Asheville apartment and had temporarily taken up refuge in Hendersonville during this time.
Yeah, when you said by a stroke of luck he found her, his luck, not hers.
Yeah. That's probably bad phrasing on my part, but
no, I mean it works, just not for her.
Yeah. Or a few other people, as we will soon see. But that night, he was kind of tired. However, he made it to Asheville. It'd been a long journey for him. So Harris soon decided to call it a night and got some rest, booking a room at a local hostel. Now, how he got the money, I could only assume he probably robbed someone on the way up, because I don't think, fresh out of prison, you're probably not full pockets at the time.
Right. Yeah, more than likely.
But the next morning, kind of going along with that, he went on a shopping spree in downtown with a ripe $35. So he went and bought some new clothes, a Savage rifle, and a jug of bourbon for $3 for that jug. So can't have been, I don't know. I'm not going to do the math on prices, but
all we're going to say is inflation's a bitch.
Yeah, right. So after his little shopping spree and some asking around, Harris was able to locate Pearl's apartment on the corner of Valley Street and Eagle Street. And with gun in hand, Harris forced his way into the apartment and kind of began trying to sweet talk, trying his luck with Pearl since her sister was nowhere to be found. He figured he would throw on the charm and see if he could win the sister over. And she did allow him to stay, but I would imagine the gun in his hand probably had a lot to do with him being let in the apartment more so than whatever charm he was throwing on at the time.
Sure.
But she allowed him to stay until her boyfriend, Tony Johnson, arrived later that night. And upon arrival, Tony was greeted at the door by Harris brandishing his brand new rifle. So, naturally, fearful for his girlfriend and his own life, Tony ran to the Asheville police station, which is literally right around the corner. Like, it couldn't be more conveniently located to where this takes place.
Yeah.
So he was able to get down there within a matter of minutes. And he was able to find Captain John Page and Officer Charles Blackstock, who came to Tony's aid. Now, he'd warned them that Harris was armed and dangerous. I don't know how seriously they heeded that warning, because when the officers arrived, they announced their arrival at the apartment, and Harris fired straight through the closed door, hitting Officer Blackstock in the chest.
Man.
Yeah, shot instantly killed him, and another shot was fired that went through Captain Page's arm, but that did allow him to escape the apartment and kind of make his way back to the station, calling for some backup. But this occurrence was enough to piss off old drunk Will here. Yeah. And in his drunken stupor and rage, he started making his way down Eagle Street, shooting at anyone and anything that moved. He gunned down 3 citizens in the process: a shop owner named Benjamin Addison, a man walking home from work named Walter Corpenine, and a man that had just been hanging out with some friends in the area named Tom Neal. And he also injured various others in the rampage, which some accounts, really unfortunately, it's sad to me, includes a dog that was shot in an alley as Harris came back through.
Man, this dude just, he didn't care about anything.
Yeah, and this is when he's on this spree, he's belligerent. He's yelling, he's shouting, he's going on talking about how he's the devil and he's taking as many people back to hell with him as he can. There was even an incident where he allegedly told a cop another name that wasn't Will Harris. So
right.
First of these aliases to kind of pop up again. So meanwhile, while this was happening, Captain Page had gone for backup. That was another officer named James Bailey. And Officer Bailey came to the aid, and he managed to locate Harris on South Main Street, which is today known as Biltmore Avenue, and they engaged in a shootout. Officer Bailey took cover behind this wooden telephone pole, but Harris's shot went straight through the pole, through the mouth of Officer Bailey, and it was reported that the bullet traveled all the way up the road to the Vance Monument and chipped away a piece of the stone. And now even infamous author Thomas Wolfe would even write about going to see this chipped section of the monument, and he even wrote a little fictionalized short story about the series of events titled The Child by Tiger.
Yeah, I definitely recall when I was helping Joshua P. Warren form the Haunted Asheville Ghost Tour. In fact, I think if you go to the website for that, there's some artwork at the top that has, the city skyline and the moon. And I actually did that if it's still on there. A little bit of history there. But I do remember that story of that bullet, careening off the Vance Monument. And if I did see it, I don't quite remember ever seeing where that chip was. But the Vance Monument has since then been removed over the last couple of years and is no longer there. So not really able to check anymore.
Yeah, and I don't know if they saved any of that stone for historical purposes or what, but it'd be kind of interesting to see where the stone that was used in the monument went to, or it's just
yeah, I feel like maybe it was auctioned off to random people, or they just threw it in the scrapyard.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the two.
Yeah.
Or in Warren's museum somewhere.
Which one?
I assume he's got the Vegas one now, right?
Oh, God. He's probably got a couple. Austin and I were talking about how Warren had a museum all over this town, and heck, there might still be one.
Yeah, maybe so. I'll have to look into that. So, man, when you were doing these tours, you probably knew this story and this tale like the back of your hand, or you kind of had to as you're taking your tour guides through.
I did at the time, but that being said, that was when I was like 16 and 17. So, that information definitely has faded over the years. But yeah, I mean, the tours would typically start in front of Barley's, and then we would go all the way up to like the Battery Park Hotel and talk about the Helen Clevenger murder. And then I think as we made our way back to Barley's is when we would talk about the Will Harris stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of a nice tie-in, very nice end of the night, but
it
makes sense for the walking route at least.
Nice format.
Yeah, nice format. That's a good way to put it. So after Harris had claimed his last victim in Officer Bailey, he took off south of the city, basically in the direction of Biltmore, towards the town of Hendersonville. Maybe he was trying to chase down Molly. Maybe he was just trying to get the hell out of there after maybe not even realizing what he had done. I don't know. I'm not trying to take defense of the guy, but by all accounts, he'd been sipping on that jug all day. Night comes around, he's just in a drunken rage. Who knows what state of mind the guy was in?
Yeah, maybe he got away, lived in Hendersonville, and became a serial killer in 1913. Or I guess it was like 5 years after that or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go listen to the Helen Clevenger episode.
So obviously, for a city like Asheville, this really shook up the locals. This is a huge violent event, and I think this is really probably the most violent event as far as mass shootings go in the history of the town, I would assume.
I think to this day it still is.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. So the locals are kind of all up in arms of this, and allegedly a mob of hundreds of revenge-driven men showed up at the police station asking how they could help. And, as you could see by kind of the initial shootout there, the police station was a little short-staffed at the time. So these men were organized into groups and sent out to help search for Harris. This part I thought was pretty interesting. The Finkelstein's pawn shop, apparently this was the pawn shop that Harris had purchased the weapon from. And the owner of the store felt guilty for selling the murder weapon. So he started loaning out guns to all these people in the search party, just making sure that everyone that was on the search for Will was armed and ready to go in case they did encounter him.
Yeah.
So I guess that's one way to pay it back.
Yeah. I mean, hey, good on him.
Yeah. And I love this name, but with the help of a bloodhound named Biscuit Eater.
Oh man.
Old Biscuit Eater.
now we got the star of the story.
Right.
Here comes Biscuit Eater.
Avenging his fallen dog brethren.
He's gonna eat your biscuits, Harris.
So this bloodhound named Biscuit Eater was instrumental in helping locate Harris, who was found sleeping in a barn outside the town of Fletcher a couple days later on November 15th. Now, after someone in the group had located Harris, they shot at him. Natural reaction. And this kind of drove Harris to obviously wake up, freak out, and jumped in a nearby laurel bush and blindly started firing his rifle at the crowd, threatening to kill everyone there.
Yep.
So that seems pretty on brand for the character that we just saw masquerading through the streets of downtown Asheville. But the group kind of held back. They let him blindly fire. I don't think he was hitting anyone by any means. He was just kind of shooting at whatever he could through the bush, trying to back people up. They just kind of backed off, waited for some reinforcements to arrive. And then apparently 100 men arrived by train, cornered Harris at this bush. And from all the accounts I've seen, they fired over 500 times into this bush. And by the end of it, Harris's body was left with over 100 bullet wounds.
That's a decent average.
Yeah. That's well, 1 in 5 is hitting there. So, maybe the,
But hey, to their defense, he was in a bush.
Yeah, exactly.
Hard to see.
So, as you could imagine, the body was so badly mangled that it sort of led to some dispute over if they'd actually tracked down and killed the right man. I think the general consensus is that they did, but there was some kind of additional confusion added to this when, obviously, the body's pretty mangled. They're trying to bring in people to identify it. They bring in Pearl, who had spent a good chunk of the few days ago with them when he was basically squatting in her apartment. And they brought in Pearl to identify to see if this was Harris. And she said, well, this was the man that was in my apartment, but he gave me a different name.
Right.
So that kind of led to some confusion. And I guess, as I mentioned before, there was an additional alias that Harris had kind of shouted out when he was going through his rampage down Eagle Street. And this other one's pretty interesting. There was an account I found of another man who was brought in to identify the body, who swears up and down that was not Harris, but it was a man that he'd known since he was a child. And I think you said there was a few kind of reports that also confirmed that, right?
Yeah, I had heard that there were at least 3 people that came and were supposed to be identifying the body. And when they looked at the body, what they said was that this was not Will Harris. But then again, as you had mentioned previously, I think that the discrepancy here was the name, because obviously he had multiple aliases. So it seems more likely to me that, number one, he's got the rifle, seemingly.
Yep.
He's got the mentality and the attitude. He's screaming at everybody that's going to kill him.
Yep.
Kind of fits the bill. So I kind of understand why there would certainly be, there's probably easily confusion if he's handing out different names to all these people. But it does seem, as far as you and I were able to track down, that the person that was inevitably murdered in the bush was, maybe not Will Harris, if that wasn't his God-given name, as they say, but it was certainly the perpetrator of this heinous crime, as far as we can tell.
Yeah, and let's not discount Biscuit Eater's nose here. He put in some good work.
Bro,
so
you ain't kidding. I mean, that adds even more to it.
Yeah, for sure. And, with the condition of the body, it's kind of easy to see how some people could just not be entirely sure on this.
Yeah,
And
you're going to look a little different after 100 bullets hit.
Yeah, exactly. So after mostly being identified, the body of Will Harris was put on display for the town as proof that the reign of terror was over.
Different time, folks.
Yeah, which for me, I'd be more terrified if I saw a freaking body in the street with 100 bullet holes in it.
I know. Like, if you were a kid in the early 1900s and saw that, you weren't sleeping for at least a couple months.
Yeah.
That probably haunted a lot of people. But then again, hell, maybe back then it wasn't that weird to see a dead body.
Yeah, maybe that was just the tradition. Once the criminal was caught, hey, we got him, guys.
But in some ways, I mean, I understand why they did what they did, because, I mean,
it probably did set the town at peace. There's no nightly news to let everyone know that they got him, and couldn't imagine a more blunt way to inform people. So
well, and there's a lot of cases that go completely unsolved. I mean,
true.
Again, not to spoil the entire Helen Clevenger thing, but there was some discrepancy against what happened there. So I'm sure that there was probably a lot of people, not sleeping as easily after that took place as well.
Yeah. So in a way, it's kind of like, we'll say tooting their own horn, but kind of like,
yeah, we got him.
It's
the thing.
when your cat catches a little mouse and brings it back to you. That's what I would equate that to.
When your cat shoots a mouse with 100 bullets. Right. Happens to me all the time.
I mean, on that note, allegedly, when the body was on display, people were still coming up and still firing shots at the thing.
Oh my God, that just made me think the Triggering Mouse Balls podcast. All right, sorry, I'll stop.
So as people continue to take shots at this body as it's on display, the city realizes, okay, we need to take this thing down. It's stirring people up a little too much.
Yeah.
Which led to that being removed. And from what I could tell, the body kind of mysteriously vanished after. There's some theories, maybe more on the conspiracy theory side, that kind of allude to the body potentially being sold to a carnival. Because I guess at the time, some of these traveling road shows would be like, this is the corpse of insert famous criminal here. So
yeah, well, I remember on top of, I can't remember the story, but I remember there was like a guy that was kind of just like a mannequin, essentially, of a guy that was like sitting on top of one of Josh's museums over there behind Pax Tavern. And I thought that was kind of in line with some sort of thing like that, where they were parading around the body. And there was some famous person, like you were talking about, that they would he was literally taxidermied, some famous outlaw or something.
I remember
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, he was it was some weird, almost like, I don't want to say, he had some weird, almost con man backstory, right? No one knew where he came from.
Yeah.
And then he just showed up. No one claimed his body, and he just kind of became mummified or something along those lines.
Yeah, something like that. And then they ended up like propping him up at some sort of like, I don't know, some sort of little like gift shop or something.
Yeah, I remember hearing that story too.
Like, dude, this is a dude.
Yeah.
It's like a real guy.
Yeah, I definitely remember. Maybe we need Warren on for that one. Maybe we found our Warren episode.
Probably so. By the way, y'all were creepy back in the day.
Speaking of creepy, I've even seen some reports that say that the former owners of Barley's kept a photo of Harris's bullet-ridden corpse in the restaurant. And I don't know if that was on display or really what to make of that in general. I kind of hope the new owners got rid of that, because that's not really something I want to look at while I'm trying to enjoy some pizza and beer.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that before the show, I had kind of thought for a second that, when the Haunted Asheville tour was getting set up and Warren was establishing that connection with the people that were running Barley's and using Barley's as kind of a starting point for the whole tour, I almost feel like I remember him supplying them with things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least that Warren supplied them with the picture of Will Harris, which I definitely did see back in the day. But I don't know if it was ever displayed in the restaurant. And if it was, I don't know if it was displayed there for very long. Because, again, it's a pretty family-friendly place. Yeah, and not exactly wanting to show a dead body with 100 bullet holes in it while everybody's trying to have some pizza.
Yeah, naturally.
But when I open a restaurant...
So this next piece, this makes it even more full circle. The city of Asheville actually prohibited alcohol sales in the city the following year due to the drunken violence of this incident, which kind of eventually paved the way for prohibition quite a few years later. But I mentioned that this is so full circle because this event that occurred basically right outside Barley's led to alcohol being banned in Asheville. Years later, Oscar Wong comes along and opens Asheville's first craft brewery, basically right on the site.
Well, apparently it just takes one guy to ruin it for everybody else, and then one guy to make everything awesome again.
There you go.
Thanks, Oscar.
So, outside of that weird photo that they allegedly kept, I've kind of been wondering, how do these events directly tie back to Barley's itself? Because as you mentioned in the past, Barley's has been the starting point for not just Warren's ghost tour. I think it's the starting point for various ghost tours around the area. And, I'm sure you've had some experience giving the tours there. I don't know if you've ever had anything paranormal happen while you were in that area or any sort of weird experiences yourself dealing particularly with Barley's, but it's definitely become the area that's kind of mostly associated with the Will Harris killing spree.
Yeah. I never personally experienced anything in there but a pretty decent buzz. Barley's was one of the first bars I ever went to and was able to drink beer in. And I just have really incredible memories of the spot. Again, it had this older kind of cozy vibe to it. But when you're in there, it is no surprise to me in the least that some of the people that work there experience strange things because I don't know, man, it just kind of has this old kind of, I mean, you feel almost in a way like you're kind of in an old Western saloon.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think the wood floor, the kind of old classic bar definitely add to that vibe.
I think that there's a lot of like Western depictions of like giant, Western bar fight brawls, and they happen in these old wooden buildings that are kind of open and sprawling. And Barley's 100% has that kind of like traditional old, larger, 2-floor saloon kind of deal.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I've just been kind of trying to trace back, what is this connection? What's the common thread that connects Will Harris or any of this killing spree to the exact Barley's location? Now, I've seen some say that Harris shot one of his victims right in front of the building that became Barley's. And I've seen another account that said the building was actually the pawn shop where the murder weapon was purchased at. Now, I can't confirm either of those, but either way, we could say that Barley's is located in the vicinity that the killing spree took place. So I think that's a loose enough connection to kind of get people's association going in their mind.
I think also because the massacre in general kind of took place like around Barley's on almost all sides of it,
Yeah, when you think about that, I guess so.
Because it started on Eagle Street, and you can go out the back of Barley's and be on Eagle Street, and then you're up on Broadway there in the front. That's right, Broadway.
Yeah, or is that Biltmore? I think it's Biltmore Avenue.
I can never remember.
Yeah, because it goes towards
one of them B things. You have them essentially going around the back to Eagle Street and then going up the front and then being able to, shoot and hit the Vance Monument. So this really does kind of encompass the entire general area. So again, I mean, you had a pretty wide massacre, and, maybe Barley's was a place back at that time that was a social hub. Who knows? Maybe it was kind of a place that these spirits potentially glommed onto. Who knows?
Yeah, and I do think that's kind of interesting because it almost goes back to our very first episode when we were talking about the Pink Lady and some of these spirits that have attached to Elaine's nightclub down there, because that was a newer addition by all historical records. Some of these spirits and ghosts that were associated with the inn itself, they wouldn't have been around, or Elaine's wouldn't have been around at the time of their death. So it's almost like, check out the new spot that opened up.
Yeah, exactly.
But from what I could tell, the first person to experience something strange and unexplained at Barley's was a contractor who was actually hired to install this old pine wood flooring that we've been talking about while they were renovating, about to reopen in '94. So while he was cutting the wood, the contractor witnessed the elevator come up and open by itself. Sure, sounds kind of weird, but to really make this sink in, this elevator was fully manual, one of those old school ones where you have to literally manually open and close this door, this gate type door to get in, push the buttons, and when you reach the top, you have to manually open that gate again. So when the contractor hears this elevator comes up, sees this gate open by itself, seemingly, he freaks out, quits on the spot, leaves this wood uncut, and even leaves his tools behind. And that was a story reported from the original owners of Barley's.
Yeah, I definitely remember hearing that story. Man, I had not heard that in years.
Yeah.
And that's such a cool thing because, I mean, gosh, we've all seen that creepy old elevator. It's so cool. It's just like, from a bygone era. But imagine standing there and watching that metal cage door coming open by itself. Dude, I would be running.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that was kind of the first thing that tipped off some of the Barley's ownership and staff, like, there might be something in this building.
Oh, boy.
And then I think, countless employees and customers have kind of added to that legacy over time. There's one former Barley's employee who swears up and down that there's a portal located on the second floor ceiling and that she could feel spirits coming through and into the building. Now, I don't know anything from a technical standpoint on that. We'd probably have to talk to Alan Greenfield on how that could occur. But hey, I'm not going to knock her theory on that. If that's what she feels some sort of energy there, who am I to say she's wrong?
Sure, yeah.
The other one, this is the one that I'd always heard and always stuck with me. It was another employee that witnessed a full-bodied apparition of a female figure walking up the stairs. And now when you're in the downstairs area, Barley's, typically kind of the restaurant area, they do have this old wooden staircase on the kind of back right side of the building that goes upstairs to more of the bar taproom area. It's just big open space, and you could kind of see exactly what's going on pretty much all the way up the stairs. But this employee witnesses this female full-bodied apparition walk up to the second floor and then just disappear. He disappeared, and first the employee kind of thought she was just going crazy, seeing things, tried to shake it off until one of her customers just asked her, like, hey, did you just see that go up the stairs? And from all the reports I've seen, she quit her job shortly after that night.
There you go.
And this one I do like because it almost adds that layer of skepticism. It's not just people being like, oh yeah, I work at Barley's, it's haunted, I see stuff all the time. It's a report from an employee that worked there for over 10 years. And she said that during a majority of that time, she really didn't experience anything at all. She just kind of wrote it off to the hype and the enriching the lore of the town type stuff.
Yeah.
Until one night when her and a couple friends were hanging out after hours, having some drinks, she went into the bathroom. And when she went into the stall, she heard the bathroom door open and heard footsteps come in. Now, the coworkers she were hanging out with were female, so she assumed that one of them was just coming in there with her. But when she opened the stall, bathroom was completely empty. So I think that one made a believer out of her, someone that had kind of been a previous skeptic to everything occurring in that building.
Oh, yeah.
And even the former owners have reported hearing footsteps and voices upstairs after closing when no one was there. And this is the one that kind of gets me. They also reported seeing a dark, shadowy figure of a man quickly walking by the second floor windows, which is pretty impressive considering there's no balcony, no walkway there. So it's just some open air windows, and they've allegedly seen this kind of out of the corner of their eye, dark, shadowy figure of a man walking by. And I think some other customers have kind of seen the same thing, that dark, shadowy figure. They've reported him near the front doors as well. Some have even described him as a man in black. Now, I don't think that's your kind of traditional Keelian type man in black. I think this is probably more likely alluding to these peripheral, corner of your eye, dark shadow figures that we've alluded to in quite a few previous episodes that seem to be something people can pick up on in just that little ninja peripheral vision.
Yeah, I'd heard that story back in the day too. And the thing that always crossed my mind with that was, so when they were creating the Battery Park Hotel that we know now, it used to be up on a hill, and they leveled all of that, and they displaced all the dirt and turned that into what we now know as Cox Avenue.
Yeah.
My question was, did they do anything similar with the land down there where Barley's used to sit and leveled it out and then built that 2-story building up there, but the ground actually was a little bit closer before they leveled everything out. And then whatever apparition they would have been seeing would have been walking on the ground that they knew. However, I can't back that theory up with anything because I have no idea if they leveled out any of that ground.
Yeah, true. That's an interesting way to think about that.
But it would be cool to look into that aspect because if we were able to find any record, that would add some more credence to what people are seeing there.
For sure. And I think that's something we probably have to dig into some county or city historical records, probably held at the courthouse for that, because I tried to do as much digging as I could find to figure out what this building or even just the location of Barley's building was at the time of 1906. But as far back as I could find, just went to the 1920s when it was used as an appliance store. So
yeah.
And, internet can only do so much. You gotta get your hands dirty and dig into some public records sometimes. Another kind of weird occurrence or apparition that some customers have claimed to see is actually a small girl that's said to be dressed in old style clothing, kind of a period coat. And one customer actually claims to have captured a photograph of this apparition at the front door of the restaurant. Now, apparently, I've used all my free Asheville Citizen Times article views, so I couldn't get into the news article to find the picture, but I will do some digging around before this episode comes out to see if I could locate that.
I probably haven't used up all mine, so send it to me.
Yeah, there we go.
We'll figure it out.
I'm not subscribing out of principle here.
Well, for the sake of the podcast, maybe we can chip in and get that for you.
Yeah, right. That might come in handy at some point. So yeah, I think, especially I haven't seen the picture, but from all the descriptions I've seen, it seems like it's a pretty significant apparition. And from what I understand, it's almost like her body is almost in two parts, like her feet are on the front side of the door, but then her back half of her body, they just see through the window part of the apparition. So it's like a weird, almost like split in where that apparition is almost like bleeding through the door.
Well, that's not creepy at all.
Right?
You know what I would be really interested to do is once we get a subscription to the Asheville Citizen Times, I would love to compare that side by side to the child apparition photo from Lake Lure.
Ooh,
and see
that'd
if,
be cool.
See if there's any sort of, like calling card energy signatures on those.
Yeah, and at least compare like the era of the clothing, stuff like that. Like some common threads or hints you might be able to pick up on.
Because it won't be too long before we're visiting old Lake Lure down there.
I saw Chimney Rock announce an official opening date, end of the month in June. Make your reservations now, people.
Oh, that is so exciting to hear because I saw a video that was just posted 9 days ago of the area between Girton and Chimney Rock, and oh my God, it is still so horribly bad.
Yeah, I don't know if that way is going to be open when they open the park in the town, or if they're still going to redirect you kind of through the lakeway.
Yeah, I would assume they probably will, but I am so very glad to hear that Chimney Rock is going to be accessible again because that community needs some tourism.
No joke for sure. So jumping back to Barley's, it's, all this activity is no doubt significant, but again, it's kind of hard to see how some of these reported entities that people are reportedly seeing in Barley's can be directly tied back to this killing spree in 1906. I've seen a few other strange occurrences reported throughout Eagle Street and Biltmore Avenue specifically. One of them involves apparitions of police in these old style uniforms sprinting frantically through the street, almost like they're still reacting to whatever heinous killing spree is going on at the time. And to me, that kind of sounds more like one of those imprint and time type apparitions that aren't necessarily aware of the surroundings or interacting with the modern day surroundings. It's just kind of like a loop that it kind of gets imprinted on an area. And I think a lot of that is often tied to real tragic situations that occur.
Heightened senses of emotion seem to, I don't know if it's the soul, I don't know if it's the electricity that courses through the human body, but leave these imprints somewhere in time. It's just such an interesting situation.
Yeah. And that one, specifically stands out because that's such a vivid image of just like what I picture old school, like billy clubs and everything, police just racing through the street. And like, I can only imagine what kind of like, what the hell moment people must have if they see something like that.
They probably think it's the frickin' Lazoom tour. Because like you got a nun on a unicycle riding by. It's like, okay, well, I'm glad that that's not something that haunts town, but in a way it kind of is.
I have a funny Lazoom story. We were actually pulling out of an alley where the Lazoom bus was about to drive by. And for those who don't know, Lazoom's this big purple comedy bus. And they do these little skits around town. So they load everyone up on a bus and kind of give them your traditional tourist ride through town. But then they have these like actors in costume throughout little parts of town that are strategically there when the bus goes by. So it's like a little skit that everyone gets to witness.
Yeah, it's like a play on wheels sort of.
Yeah. So I was about to pull out of this alley and we're looking and like this dude's putting on a face mask, like looking like he was about to rob something. Yeah. And we're like, what the hell? And then like out of the kind of rear view window, I just see this guy start like full on sprinting, and my friend's in the car, and they said they were like seconds away from just opening the passenger door and just nailing him with the thing when we noticed the Lazoom bus come by and then be part of that.
Yeah, that would have been a real tragic moment.
Right? Probably even funnier for the people on the bus though. I don't know.
Yeah.
Jumping back, I do think there are these apparitions that are seen around that area that you can directly attribute to the Will Harris murders, and there are a few others. People have reported hearing phantom screams or phantom dog barks or howls coming from these alleys right off Eagle Street that are often attributed to Harris's victims, the dog being one of them. But, the apparitions commonly reported at Barley's, they really seem to be something completely different. To me, at least. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Really hard to say. I agree with you that it is kind of hard to tie exactly what happened in the massacre to Barley's because, number one, you have an apparition of a child there, the little girl, but there obviously was not a little girl that was murdered in the massacre.
Yeah.
That only opens the question for me. Man, I really want to know more about what the whole history of the building that eventually became Barley's was, know. But the thing about it is like, when you're building a town in the, whenever Asheville was put together and modern medicine isn't what it used to be, accidents happen.
True.
I feel like when you're building a city that's that large, there are any number of casualties and fatalities that can happen just doing, everyday construction at that point. So for all we know, there could have been all kinds of stuff. There could have been ghosts of what Asheville was when it was a settlement before they started really like putting that together. Because I mean, if you kind of think about it if you watch like the show Deadwood or something like that, I mean, when these towns were settlements, I mean, you had disease, you could get killed by a horse running over you and God knows what, and just not have the proper medical ability to take care of yourself.
For sure. I played Oregon Trail.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You watch Deadwoods, like somebody dies of something, obviously tuberculosis was rampant.
Yeah, that's huge.
A huge one. So, I mean, every apparition that they are seeing in Barley's easily could be attributed to just regular death in the early settlement.
Yeah, for sure. And I have seen a few different theories on this, and I wasn't completely able to confirm this, but I did find a few different sources that claimed the area directly behind Barley's had been previously used as the city gallows where criminals were executed.
Man.
Which is, it adds some dark, heavy energy to an already dark and heavy block, if you want to call it that. But again, like, I don't know, a ghost of a little girl, like, I don't see how that would be directly attributed to the gallows directly. But the dark shadow figure, some people have attributed that to the spirit of the city's former executioner, kind of walking his normal path that he would go on his way to work, right behind the Barley's building where the gallows were allegedly at. Again, that's one I probably do need to get down to the courthouse, do a little bit more further digging to completely confirm that. But there were at least 2 or 3 sources that mentioned that as a possible tie-in to some of the spirits of Barley's.
Well, we're talking about heightened states of emotion leaving imprints in time and whatever those may possibly be. I mean, a spirit of a little girl or an imprint of a little girl
could be like, watching her dad be.
Exactly. Somebody that's watching a relative get their head chopped off at the gallows.
Yeah.
And they were so traumatized by that that they it left an imprint.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a really good thought. I hadn't thought of it from that angle.
Pretty weird.
Yeah. Kind of the one way I was kind of trying to look at it, or at least think of ways to draw a connection. It goes back to that weird photo that they allegedly kept in there. And, I'm not trying to defend the dude by any means, but at the same time, it's kind of a form of disrespect to the dead in a way, wouldn't you think? Like,
sure.
It's literally insult to injury. You have a corpse, hundreds of bullet wounds, and you're just stapling a picture there like a trophy. And again, I don't know if this is on display, but I saw it mentioned that it was kept in the building at least. And I think you got to go back to even where the body was kept on display there. Like, in some way, did the spirit of Will Harris make its way back to this area to somehow attach to this block in general? I'm not really sure, but I do think it's interesting that the only blatant connection to Will that I could find at Barley's was that interesting photo. So I don't know if that's just inviting or stirring up or asking for something. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here.
I've seen a lot of programs that depicted a haunting in a house where a haunting was, I remember one particular one on a show that I was watching where this house was haunted. This took place in Canada, but this little boy kept seeing this old, angry man that was like always pointing at him and scowling, and it was like he was yelling something. And then they would always be hearing these like footsteps on top of the roof of the house. And it turns out that the person that owned the house was a pretty violent, drunk, older man that apparently was really abusive to his son. And so they kind of felt like this entity was targeting this young boy. And they had, priest come in and do the whole get the hell out of here, go wherever it is you're supposed to go thing. And then the things kind of subsequently stopped. I do think that that's a very interesting thing to take into consideration when you have somebody that is obviously deeply troubled, obviously has a propensity to be very angry, obviously has a problem with alcohol, or at least in Will Harris's instance that he did during that massacre. I feel like spirits like that are inherently conflicted.
Yeah.
They're going to have the harder time moving on. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if, I don't know how it works over there. It snaps them back over to wherever they're supposed to be, or they're just reliving that memory in a loop. Yeah, either way, I mean, I don't take anything off the table. I don't know if any of this stuff is real. However, enough people have claimed to see stuff there that makes you kind of wonder.
Yeah, and I think for me, it kind of just goes back to that age-old question, like, what really are ghosts? You know, like everyone has the common theory that it's the spirits of the dead passed on, but
Yeah.
some of these instances, especially when we talk about these imprints or loops in time, like I don't think it's always as cut and dry as just a spirit passed on to forever roam the afterlife. I think there's probably a little bit more to it that we don't fully or even capable of understanding.
For me, it always ends up leading back to this question of like, okay, so we are these meat puppets and we have the ability to perceive time linearly.
Mm-hmm.
But does that mean that that's how time works? Or does that mean that that's how we perceive it?
Yeah.
And I think there's a hell of a lot of stuff. FLIR technology, all kinds of different things have been able to show us that we can only see like a flashlight shining in the dark, just a very, very small perception of what reality actually is. And I think that the ghost phenomena, hopefully, as science advances, we'll have a little bit more understanding about that. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's potentially completely a temporal phenomenon.
Well, like it even goes back to our previous episode when we were talking to Alan Greenfield, and he made the comment of the consciousness is not necessarily held in the body or the brain. That's just a receiver to tap into the consciousness.
It's the antenna.
Yeah, the antenna.
Yeah.
And that almost, I won't say opened my mind, but it definitely got me thinking about ghosts in a whole other context.
I agree with you, man. And I've thought about that concept for a long time. The whole idea of, the human body is just the right amount of parts for whatever to step in.
Yeah, it's like we're just an avatar.
Yeah. Well, that gets into potentially disrupting all kinds of different beliefs.
True.
So I will just say we are just merely speculating here, people. But it is fun to think about because, I don't know, it does seem like there's a hell of a lot more going on than we will maybe ever know in our lifetime.
Yeah, and I think I'm okay with that because sometimes takes the fun out of it when you know all the answers to everything. You got to have the mysteries of the world to strive for.
Yeah, not to mention, what are we going to do a podcast about? Loch Ness? Jesus. Well, is there anything else that you've got as far as, the haunting of Barley's and the subsequent areas you want to touch on?
I think that pretty much wraps it up. I'm sure there's countless other examples and experiences that people have or might have had working or just going to eat, being a patron of Barley's itself. If it's something that you have had an experience, we'd definitely love to hear it. And like I mentioned before, this is a place that they're just opening back up. So seriously, go support them. People, the salvage station owner staff are awesome people. And, there's not a lot of places that you could go enjoy a casual drink that you have that slight chance of experiencing something on the high strange side as well.
No doubt. And the thing about it is, if you want to experience this place for yourself, all while understanding maybe even more than we've laid out for you here, the Haunted Asheville Ghost Tours and other haunted ghost tours in town are available. You can go right where these things occurred and see a lot of this area for yourself. And, we highly encourage that. Asheville's still getting back up on its feet after Hurricane Helene. And if nothing else, it's a spooky time. It's an informative time. And
Yeah. And I think that should be said because we have been advocating for so many places that rightfully do need your business and support. The hot springs, the lake lures, the chimney rocks, all these places where they experience more devastation than we could even, blink an eye at where we are in Asheville. Not to take away from what we experienced, but those places were definitely significantly hit harder. But at that same breath, Asheville's still in recovery mode as well. I saw a statistic maybe a week or two ago. Hotel bookings for the summer are down 45% year over year, with long-term bookings for the summer not showing any sign of recovery on that. So people, get out to the mountains.
Yep. Come and drink our beer. There's some mountains you can get to. I would say come visit the mountains, go on the parkway, but most of that is still shut down. However, the city of Asheville and certain other places around here, just look it up on the internet before you come. Check it out. Make sure you got a little bit of an itinerary. But as always, we'd like to thank Oscar Wong and his contributions to this area.
Yeah.
Highland Brewing, having a Highland Gaelic Ale up in Barley's used to be You know,
that's a rite of passage. It's like when you turn 21, that's what you go do.
And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah. Hey, cheers.
So either way, I will leave you all with this. Austin and I could not be more thrilled with the outreach from the listeners of this podcast. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for sending in your stories and writing us in, just telling us we're doing a good job, because, or at least you think that we are, because
some days we need the encouragement.
Yes. We don't always wake up going, yeah, we're gonna kill it today. Even though we are as researched as we possibly can, it still is really, really nice for you guys to drop a line and tell us that you're enjoying it. It means like a ton to us. So seriously, thank you. And thank you to everybody that's been buying merchandise on the website, ghostsinthemountains.com. I was just in Alabama, and my buddy from California rolls up wearing a Ghosts in the Mountains t-shirt.
Nice.
I was very excited to see that. But again, you can find us on ghostsinthemountains.com. We've got t-shirts for sale over there. You can subscribe to us on Patreon to get a completely ad-free version of the podcast and some extra goodies that we will show you behind the scenes, like the frickin' bear that just walked into the podcast today. Only you can prevent forest fires. But without your support, we truly would be nothing, and we cannot thank you enough. So we hope that you have enjoyed this episode, and we will catch you next week on another spooky episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. Thank you, and stay spooky, everybody. But for real, man. Biscuit eater, what a badass.
Let's name that bear Biscuit Eater.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
That's just Biscuit Eater. That's the reincarnated Biscuit Eater.
Hey, Biscuit Eater, stop eating biscuits out of my trash. I am so tired of cleaning that shit up. All right. There's your Keister egg, everybody. We'll see you next time. Good night.